Good morning. Thanks very much for joining us. Congress is on recess, and that gives us an opportunity we always relish to talk with the ever-outspoken congressman from the 7th District of Massachusetts, Representative Mike Capuano. Welcome, Congressman.
I think that's okay, ever outspoken.
Well, now that I've said that, you've got to live up to the billing, and you've got to tell me what is going on with our president.
I ask myself, unfortunately, that question every day. I thought I had kind of seen it all, and every day I think, well, okay, he can't do anything more, and pretty much every day he finds another way to, get to further down in the bottom of the barrel. And it's just stunning to me. So I can't answer the question. I'm asking the same questions myself.
You have friends in Congress on the other side of the aisle, right? What do they say? Privately.
Privately, they will say things differently than they will say in public.
Right,
privately, many of them know the problem. They're deeply concerned for themselves because they see themselves being weighed down by his problems and what he's doing, his intention, not just problems, but his intentional actions. Number one. Number two is they disagree with the way he's doing things. The people that I tend to be most friendly with are the more moderate Republicans, the kind of Republicans that we used to have here in the Northeast, and Charlie Baker still would fit in that crowd. People we may have disagreements with, but they're relatively small disagreements. I will tell you that they don't know how to extricate themselves because on some degree they have to look at a primary and wherever they come from, California, Texas, and in a primary they have to deal only with the Donald Trump people make up, I won't say a majority, but a significant number, if not a majority, in a Republican primary. And then they have to run against a Democrat. So that they're kind of betwixt and between.
Well, that's why I kind of raised my eyebrows when I saw Senator Bob Corker of Tennessee, that's a state that went for Trump, coming out and saying in front of cameras that he thought the president lacked the competence and stability to be successful. Does that signal some kind of a change in this?
I mean, Corker is not known as a bomb thrower. He's not a radical of any kind. He's seen as a pretty stable, moderate, understated man, conservative, but thoughtful conservative as opposed to, toss a grenade in the tent. And when he said that, to be perfectly honest, I will tell you that I've had many conversations with Democratic colleagues, all of whom are giving him proper respect for having had the courage to say what we may say, but it looks partisan. He said it. And don't forget, he was under consideration for Secretary of State. He was under consideration for Vice President. And he didn't call him a name or anything. He basically just called it as he sees it, that this president has some competence problems. Could
that be a signal to other Republicans that it's becoming more okay to distance yourself?
And don't forget that while we're home dealing with our constituents at a community meeting the other night, everybody else is doing the same thing, House and Senate, so that they are hearing from their constituents one-on-one, sometimes in group meetings, sometimes individually, while they're home. They're not just inside the Washington Beltway listening to the echo chamber. And you got to figure that they've got to be hearing at least some of the stuff that I'm hearing at home.
One more thing before we take a break, and then I want to get into some more local stuff here. I'm sure you have constituents in the 7th District who agree with what President Trump said the other day about both violence on the left and his objections to the removal of Confederate statues. What's your response to them?
I haven't had anybody reach out with those opinions in my district. My answer would be, look, I'm as aggressive as the next guy. And I understand aggressive debate and being vehement about your opinions, but there's a difference between that and walking into a demonstration with clubs and shields and face masks. That's a different story. And so therefore, I will tell you that I have not had any of my constituents agree with him on those items, mainly because he's not having a thoughtful conversation about it. He's doing what Donald Trump seems to be good at.
What about the statues?
No one's raised it to me yet. I think that there is a reason to have some discussion about that. There's some discussion in Boston about the one statue we have here out on George's Island. It's a little different. It was the people who were here as prisoners. But it'll be discussed, and I think that it's a fair discussion to have. I have to be honest, it's always been amazing to me. No other country in the world would put up statues to people who had led a civil war. Nobody else would do that.
Somebody vandalized the Christopher Columbus statue the other night down in the North End. Not the first time that's happened. What do you think of that?
Look, I think there are people that want to put today's standards on people of yesterday. I think that's a mistake. But civil war is civil war, and slavery is slavery. And demonizing them is not necessarily what people want to do, but then honoring them is a whole different story. So the Christopher Columbus thing, look, you want to put today's standards on somebody from the 1400s, I think that's probably a mistake.
All right, we'll take a quick break, and we'll continue our conversation with the congressman from the 7th District here in Massachusetts, Mike Capuano. Please stay with us. Welcome back. We're talking with Congressman Mike Capuano of the 7th District. And Congressman, back last winter, there were reports that the Trump administration had included the $1 billion federal contribution to the Green Line extension in their plans. And since then, the state has given the plan the green light. Are you sure that federal money is safe?
At the moment, yes, but never done until the check is written. But it's not $1 billion single payment. It's payment over a period of years.
Right.
And the Congress has appropriated $150 million, if I remember the number correctly, that's sitting there waiting for the final approval. So the answer is the first set of money is pretty solid, as long as things continue the way they're going, which so far things are going well. I will never say I will rest comfortably until the first station opens.
Yeah, because I wonder to what extent, you saw the health care reform collapse. Now tax reform appears to be on shaky ground. Infrastructure and the money to do that is all tied in with the available pool. What's the story?
The Green Line money is based on current law and current regulations and current standards, not the ones that we may or may not adopt in the future. So that it is a different situation. This is not based on anything. This was done way before Trump was even conceived of as being president, and that's what we're continuing with. If it was subject to his new proposal, I'd be much more worried.
What's your guess about when we start seeing shovels in the ground?
I think you see some right now, but a few, but you'll see a lot of them probably next summer. Okay. Next construction cycle.
Well, listen, I'd be remiss if I didn't finish up with some real local politics here. There are reports that Cambridge City Councilor Nadeem Mazen is thinking of running against you next year. That would be your first serious primary challenger in basically forever. You've been in there 20 years. Is it time for new blood?
Well, it's hard to tell. I mean, I'll let the voters make those decisions. And look, if I have an opponent, I have an opponent. That's the way life is. I've never been shy about that.
Do you know the guy?
I know Nadeem very well. He's a pretty good guy. We have difference of opinion on some minor things, but not that many. But we'll see. He has to make a decision what he wants to do. I've already announced I'm running for re-election. I don't want anyone to doubt that. And we'll see. If it's not him, it'll be somebody else. And I've never worried about those things.
Your appetite for the job is undiminished?
My appetite for the job is even more now. I mean, I have to be honest, Mr. Trump has whetted my appetite even more. I want to be there to make sure that he doesn't destroy the America we all know and love. And I would love, love, love the opportunity to serve in Congress again with Democratic majorities.
Thanks, Congressman.
All right, John.
Good to see you. Appreciate it. Congressman Mike Capuano, that's it for me. Now it's back over to my colleagues for more WBZ News.